All right, welcome to Fox 26 after the newscast. We've moved here to the couch with an ensemble here, but it is all about the Isiah Factor Uncensored today, and the big story he broke for us at 5:30. So Isiah, why don't you take it away?
Well, former city councilman Jarvis Johnson was leaving work on September 13th, and he was pulled over by a Precinct 1 deputy constable.
That's Alan Rosen.
Yes. And as soon as he pulled Johnson over for speeding, I think it was 35 and a 55, the deputy came out of the car with his gun drawn on Johnson, and then Johnson said he was cursed. And then when other officers from HPD arrived on the scene, then he was eventually hit in the face by one of the officers, and then $2,500 disappeared. And he walked away with just a speeding ticket, and you're wondering why so many deputies were involved, so many officers were involved on a basic traffic stop.
Yeah, I mean, I've been stopped for going faster than that, and certainly the officer who approached me did not approach with a weapon drawn.
Yeah.
That's not been my experience, but this is not the first time that I've heard of an African-American man having this experience. So this is certainly not a unique circumstance because he's a high-profile person. I think that's probably why we're talking about this, but I guarantee that a lot of people who watched our newscast tonight are nodding their heads and saying, I've had a similar situation. In fact, this is not the first time that Jarvis Johnson has been stopped by police for speeding. I believe the previous charge was evading arrest, and by the way, he was no-billed by a Harris County grand jury back in 2010. So one could understand that he's probably asking a lot of questions about why these things may be happening to him as a motorist.
You're absolutely
let's
right.
talk about this, and let's bring in our guests. Would you
Jolanda
like to do the honors?
Local attorney, and Derek Muhammad, an activist who's been working with Mr. Johnson on this case as well.
Yes, one of the things that sticks out to me is the fact that Jarvis Johnson is a high-profile individual, but he still lives in the black community. Most of us, when we quote-unquote make it, we get as far away as possible from our people. So probably one of the reasons that this keeps happening to him is the fact that he lives in the community. He does business in the community. He owns a restaurant in the community. And it perplexes me that you had this many officers pull him over for a traffic stop. They searched his vehicle, which was against his constitutional rights. They stole his money. They struck him. And there was not one African-American officer on the scene.
Well, let me ask you this as we bring in attorney Jolanda Jones. Let's be clear, he was pulled over, the traffic stop violation, he was speeding according to the officer. And we don't have the video to show right now. Hopefully we'll get that for the viewers just to kind of remind them. The officer approached Isiah with his gun drawn. So tell me, you talk about rights a lot for citizens. From that standpoint, what was right or wrong with that situation?
A traffic stop is not the kind of police action that requires guns to be drawn, first of all. Let me also say this. I happen to be a mom of a black son. And my son was actually getting into my car, and they came to him and his friend with guns drawn. That was HPD. So it's very, very, very normal. Now, as a lawyer, when you look at what happens in the courts.
Wait, it's normal for them to approach with guns drawn?
In the black communities, absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. But as a lawyer, when you look at the probable cause for why officers stop people in court, in black neighborhoods and in brown neighborhoods, you will see the probable cause being speeding or changing lanes without a signal or following too closely or walking in the street when a sidewalk is provided. I mean, they find any excuse to touch you, to have a reason to interact with you. You don't
tail light out.
Yeah, you don't or riding a bicycle without the lights. You don't see that kind of probable cause in white neighborhoods. People can walk in the streets in white neighborhoods with a sidewalk being provided, and there are no problems. In fact, so it's just a different experience. And one of my struggles as a criminal defense lawyer is when I'm going to court, I'm having conversations with the DA all the time. Okay, now you know that if we were in River Oaks, you would never make this stop. If a guy was in the street and not on the sidewalk, you wouldn't stop him. You wouldn't frisk him. You wouldn't detain them and put them in the back of the car with handcuffs on.
Do they ever admit to that off the record?
Yeah, they admit to it off the record. But, I mean, what do you do? And so it's something that you deal with all the time, every day. And there are some prosecutors who I'm very pleased to say, when they see that and they see the disparate treatment as between the neighborhoods, then they let those cases go. I will also tell you that white people have the same problems when they happen to be in black neighborhoods or brown neighborhoods because the police figure they must be there selling drugs or doing something like
You
that.
don't belong here,
Right.
basically, is why they're being flagged.
Right, so-
and that may be for a good reason, and it may not be for a good reason.
Right.
So that's why we rely on people like you who see this day after day in
Oh,
court.
every single solitary day,
Just
which is
to
why I've
illustrate
been
that.
given Know Your Rights When the Police Stop You seminars.
You've been doing this for
Yeah.
years.
Since 1999.
Yeah.
And you know the law changes, so I have to update the cards. And in fact, I just did a Know Your Rights with the police seminar at St. John's Church, Beyonce's church.
Yes.
Last Sunday.
I saw that post. That's why I called you for this segment.
Okay, a really big show up. And in fact, we had people standing. We didn't have a big enough room. I have another one on October 12th at the Fountain of Praise with Pastor Remus Wright and Mia Wright. So they're going to do that. So a lot of the big churches want for me to come in because for whatever reason, it used to be something that poor people complained about a lot. You see a lot of prominent African Americans complain about it because we have children, our children are stopped, we're stopped, and people want to know their rights. And so what I suggest, Isiah, we were talking about this, the community policing that Mayor Lee Brown had.
Yeah.
I've actually have suggested to people a twist on that. And that is when we, as people of color, or even if you're not of color, when you see a police car, turn on your recording equipment. That's what happened in the Mike Brown case.
I was
so
just telling
you know
that to
what? So
Isiah.
all we need to do
That's
is we
interesting.
need to watch the police because if it comes down to a swearing match between an ordinary citizen and the police, people never believe the ordinary citizen, even if they're telling the truth.
Right.
And even when we see videos that show things, then the police always try to say something, it missed something or what have you.
Well, speaking of the video, Isiah, we found out from our producer, we have some video to show now. So tell
Okay.
us about how you got this video, how
Yeah.
you got this big story. Explain it for us, Isiah.
Well, I initially got a tip call, and someone told me this had happened to Jarvis Johnson. Right now, you're looking at Deputy John Brown walking up to Jarvis Johnson's SUV with his gun pulled out. This is after he was initially stopped on North Shepherd in North Houston. But I initially got a tip call. I contacted Jarvis. He said he wasn't ready to talk. Then about a week later, Derek Muhammad got involved. He called me and said Jarvis is ready to talk, and we hit the ground running with his story.
One
So-
of the things
go
that I
ahead.
thought was interesting, Melinda, earlier you mentioned that a lot of people are now buying dash cam videos for their vehicles.
I
to
mentioned that
protect
to
their
Isiah
rights.
jokingly in the newsroom, like I saw it on HSN this weekend. You can
Yeah.
order one, put it in your own car. But Jolanda makes a really good point about, you know, who are you going to believe? And having your
Right.
own evidence is great. And Isiah, speaking of that video, there's some things that we could not see on the video. You know about this, Derek,
Right.
that Jarvis Johnson says happened to him. So why don't you two tell us about that?
I just want to say that I back Jolanda Johnson 110%.
Jolanda Jones.
Excuse me.
She will correct you.
I got the
just gonna let her
Jolanda right. Johnson Jones. But I back my sister 110% in her quest to educate our community and other communities on knowledge of your rights and how it is you should handle yourself when you're pulled over by police. Sometimes you can know your rights, but if you're belligerent and if you're not savvy in the way that you get that over during a traffic stop or what have you, then you could get yourself in even more trouble.
Can I ask you something? Do you think, I mean, it appeared that Jarvis was very savvy. What do you think, Jolanda? I mean, he wasn't
Well,
argumentative.
what was
What do you
important
think?
for
wasn't
him
threatening.
was he said he wanted to get to a well-lit area. He was
Smart.
on a dark street.
Very smart
And many African-American males are told, if you're stopped by the cops, go to a well-lit area. And I remember Chief Charles McClellan at some point saying that shouldn't be a problem. That would protect you and the officer.
That is absolutely not true. What they charge you with is evading with a motor vehicle if you don't stop immediately on a dark street. So Jarvis did absolutely what he was supposed to do. I wish he had stopped farther back so that the cameras could have caught everything.
Yeah.
But another thing that the police officers do that they're not supposed to do, they try to go through your phone, right? So I tell people in my Know Your Rights seminar to, the second you see flashers or the second you see a police officer approaching you, turn on your recording equipment and have an app on your phone, if you have a smartphone, that immediately takes the photos up to the cloud. Because the police have been known to go through your phone, even though that's an illegal search under the
Yeah.
Fourth Amendment,
The Supreme
and
Court's been
try
real clear on that.
and try to delete things.
But you will get a hostile police officer when you do pull out that phone. And you know,
true.
obviously, if you're pulling out a phone on an officer and you're videotaping them,
but you don't have to do that, Isiah. You can be savvy.
Casual.
You can be savvy. You can turn the recording.
Well, then make that clear for them. You know, don't just hold your phone up.
You
Yeah.
can turn the recording equipment on, and they don't even know it's on. You don't have to tell them you're taping them.
I know there's an app for that.
In fact, you're more likely to get who they really are if you don't tell them that you're recording them,
Exactly.
because if they know they're being recorded, then they will probably act a fool.
I think it's a situation where you have to use your better judgment. And in this particular case, I think Jarvis Johnson used superlative judgment in the way he handled the situation. Understand, this was a traffic stop. He stops. He looks to the side and he doesn't see a police officer. He's looking down the barrel of a weapon. So at that point, this became a very dangerous situation. If you say the wrong thing, if you make the wrong move, if you flinch in the wrong way, this could be the difference between Jarvis getting a ticket and going home and being the next Mike Brown or the next Eric Garner. But now back to the cameras. I believe that is where the playing field will probably be even. The more cameras there are, the better off we are.
Yes.
For instance, if we did not have this surveillance video, then it would put that much more guesswork into what happened to Jarvis Johnson.
Right.
But even though we only have sort of like half of a video, what we do have, I believe, is enough to conduct a thorough investigation. And I mean, even anybody can see that this officer not only did he over police, I believe that's probably an understatement, but this officer was way out of control. This was a traffic stop. Why did you pull your service weapon and put it to this man's head?
Well, the pictures are objective. People are not objective, but pictures don't lie. And the more that we see things like this happen, I think the more savvy families are going to be. I hope this opens up a dialogue for people to talk with their children. And I wanted to get y'all's opinion on this because I know, Jolanda, you do a lot of instruction and you deal with a lot of young men, teaching young men about how to come up through society and how to deal with all different kinds of people from all different walks of life. How old do you think a child needs to be to start a conversation
Jolanda and I have
like
talked
this?
about
Because
this, mothers of sons.
if you know your rights, you are much better off.
I have a 22-year-old. I started talking to my son about this from the moment he was able to understand things.
Wow.
Because it's just a fact of life, and the more he knows it, the better chance he has to make it home safely when it happens. And as I told Melinda before, it's not if, it's when in the black community. It's going to happen. The question is, are our children going to come home alive? And something else I was going to say with the videos, the fact that this happened to Jarvis is really special, because what happens a lot at those convenience stores, and Derek, I don't know if you understand this, but because Jarvis is high profile, he had access to video that ordinary citizens don't have access to. And the police also are responsible for policing those convenience stores.
Exactly.
And so if the owners of the gas stations give the video to people and it gets the police in trouble, all of a sudden that convenience store isn't going to get a call, an officer coming there quickly when they're being robbed or what have you. So we're very fortunate, I probably shouldn't say this, that it happened to Jarvis in that we were able
But we
to
know
see
you mean he can bring attention to the situation.
he can
and
bring
raise
he can bring
awareness.
attention to the situation.
Yeah.
But there have been other times when there's video and the video just disappears.
And we can't get it.
Absolutely.
We've asked for
Isiah,
video
I
in
wanted
those
to ask you,
cases.
what did the constable's office have to say about all of this?
Well, they said they were made aware of the situation. Now, Jarvis said he actually went down there and filed an internal affairs complaint, and J.C. Mosier, I think the chief deputy, called me back saying the constable, Alan Rosen, told him to give me a call. He wasn't quite familiar with the story, but the constable is aware of it and that they are conducting an internal investigation on it. However, he also made the point clear that if you file a complaint like this against a police officer under state law, he said, and maybe you can verify this, the complainant, that being Jarvis Johnson, would have to take a lie detector test administered by HPD. So what does that mean,
Now,
Jolanda?
Interesting.
if that is what it is now, I don't know anything about that. First of all, lie detector tests aren't even admissible in court
Right.
because they're unreliable and they're junk science. Some people know how to pass them, and some people who are telling the truth get really nervous and they show that they're lying or they're being deceitful when they're not. So I'd actually have to check on that, but I don't know that that's
So
true.
just hearing this response, Derek, I got to ask you, it sounds like there is a lot of mistrust on both sides. And how are we, we talked about what we say to our children. I try to teach my children, the police are not bad. They're there to protect us. We need to follow the law. And I know I'm going to have the talk with my
at
children. I
Yolanda's
know.
face.
But
Well,
I don't
and
want
the
my
truth is,
5-year-old to
most
be in
police
fear
officers
every
are
time
not
she
bad.
sees a police officer.
I've worked with a lot of police officers as a
some great
reporter,
cops.
and
but we need
there's
to
some.
tell them,
Yeah,
right.
so I'm not saying that all police officers are bad. What I am saying is I want a bullseye, and I don't mean to shoot them. I mean to open eyes wide open to bad cops, because one bad police officer can ruin a whole bunch of lives. How
You're right.
many
You're
people
right.
can one officer arrest? And the problem with HPD and the Sheriff's Department and the constables is if it is a swearing match, the tie always goes to the police officer, which is why there's absolutely a problem, which is also why I believe that the courts determined that the police can't mess with your phones. Remember what they did, the Sheriff's Department did to those, I think, Ibarra brothers
Yes.
who were videotaping.
I remember that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what do we do? I mean, we've talked about this, Derek. I've talked about this.
Yes.
We have these cases happen over and over and over again. This one, Isiah got the video and could bring us the story.
I believe that, as Jolanda alluded to, you should start talking to your child as soon as they're able to understand. It can never be too soon, because you never know when your child will be in that situation where they have to use the knowledge that you've given them. And it's better that they have it and not need it than to need it and not have it. We're at the point now where we can't sugarcoat things for our children. They see what's happening in Ferguson, Missouri. They see what happened to Eric Garner in New York City. They see what happened to Victor White, who was shot in the chest while handcuffed in the back seat of a policeman's car in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, your hometown. They see this. And if they come home and you're trying to tell them that they don't see what they see, then they'll treat you like the enemy.
I also think, big picture, there should be more community policing. When I grew up in Baton Rouge, there were police officers who would walk through our community, and we got to know them, and it became almost like a friend relationship. And so when you know the people that you're policing or that you're protecting, then you have a better relationship, and you're not quick to pull a gun because you see an African-American male, and you're basically in fear of them because of so many stereotypes.
I mean, yes, Isiah, there has to be more community involvement in policing, period. But right now, I believe the founding fathers of this country would be turning over in their graves if they knew how much raw power police officers have over the citizens of this country. It's just out of control. And yes, we need community policing. Yes, we got to teach and train, but we cannot get away from the mandate that has to come from the people for there to be accountability. If you want us to give the good officers credit and separate them from the bad officers, then we believe that the good officers need to unite with the community to get the bad officers off the street. And the problem is they're doing what they're doing and they're not paying for it. That's the problem.
Which is why we need civilian review board with subpoena power. And we
Yes.
don't need to have foxes watching the hen house. And, the problem with a lot of the officers that I know that constantly violate people's constitutional rights is that they've seen a lot of really bad things, right? They've seen murders, they've seen rapes, they've seen, child molestation,
And
so
they've
they
seen their
have
colleagues shot,
and so
too.
right, and so they have this. So they've seen so many bad things that they all of a sudden just have a really jaded attitude about what's going on, and they become ends justify the means people, and they believe it's better to lock up an innocent person than it is to let a guilty person perhaps go free in order to protect the innocent. And that's not what the Constitution is about. And that is the problem. And so I think that is really, really important, like Derek said, that we have absolutely got to tell our children what's really going on. And it's interesting that you say that, because I was in ALF, it's American Leadership Forum. They had their criminal justice class. I had former district attorney Mike Anderson in there. I had current district court judge Tommy Thomas's son.
Brock Thomas?
Brock Thomas. I can't, I'm so sorry, Brock, that I couldn't remember your first name. I froze. I had a lot of people in law enforcement there, and we were supposed to share. They were teaching us about leadership. And one of the things that I told them was my biggest fear was that when my son got profiled, would he make it home alive? And they said to me, Jolanda, that's not going to happen. You know, you're successful. He would never do anything to get caught up. This is what they said to me. My son, I believe, was in maybe 9th grade at that time. My son's biggest fear was that he wouldn't live to be 25.
Oh my gosh.
Right? That is how my son grew up. And here he's got a mom who's on city council and who's a lawyer. And when my son had a gun pulled on him by an HPD officer at Gulf Gate, because it's a high crime area, and my black son and his friend who's black were entering the car after they left work, then clearly he must be breaking into my car. They drew guns on my son. My son never saw a gun. And when I went and I talked to Brock and I talked to Mike, they were like, you told us that was going to happen. I said, yes, I did, because it just is.
You know, Jolanda, the first time I ever looked down the barrel of a gun, it was in the hands of a Houston police officer. And I'm a U.S. veteran. I was in the United States Marine Corps, and I'm a Gulf War veteran. I also had a run-in once with an officer. He was plain clothes, didn't know who he was, but we got into, as a civilian, we got into an argument. Well, he actually assaulted me verbally. He called me the N-word and a whole lot of other words. Well, I was actually about to get with him, to be honest with you. But as I approached him, he reached in his his back pocket, Melinda, and he pulled out his badge. He was a sheriff. So I know the type of individuals that we have out here on the street that our people have to deal with every day.
I got to ask you both something, and this is serious. This is for me and for a lot of mothers out there, because my kids are still young, 5 and 3. So I've told you that, well, almost 3. The conversation I had with them, because I was pulled over for a ticket, but you know, black woman, smiled, Fox 26.
Pretty.
Thank you. I got away with it twice in 1 week by a constable. But it scared my daughter in the back seat. And she said, Mommy, the police, she already has this idea that, you know, that the police, they get the bad guys. And if I got pulled over for a ticket, I must be one of the bad guys. And I had to try to explain it to her. But then I know that I'm raising a young black man. What's the script? What's the script? Because I know I'm going to give the talk. I received the talk. I watched this happen to my father. What's the script for today's times? Because you don't want your children to live in fear.
Yeah, the first thing you want to teach them is not to fear. That's the first thing you want to teach them, because if they fear, then that fear could turn into behavior that makes them to act other than themselves. But knowledge is always power. Teach them their rights. Do what Jolanda, I believe she's setting a great example for the community. Teach them what their rights are. But you have to make your sons or daughters, both?
Both, one of each.
Both. You make both of them aware of what it is that their people have suffered in this country, and what young men like Trayvon Martin, Mike Brown, and others have gone through. You have to educate them.
I always think about him.
Yeah, Robbie Tolan.
Yeah.
Robbie Tolan, right. We have to expose our children to what's going on so that they know. The worst thing we can do is think that it cannot happen to us. That's the worst thing we can do. And the last thing I want to say is that it really breaks my heart that your little girl was afraid. See, right now, there's something psychological going on in urban America. I'll take you to Ferguson, Missouri. They shot this young man in his head. He laid in the streets for 4 hours. He was a stranger to us. We did not know him, but the community, this is somebody that they raised. Imagine watching that for 4 hours, and little girls your daughter's age saw that.
Yeah.
See, in the military, they call it post-traumatic stress disorder. But in urban America, we call it post-traumatic injustice disorder. Right now, the only thing that could heal us is justice. And unfortunately, we're not getting that with the process
I gotta let
that's in
Isiah wrap
place.
it up. This is his segment, Uncensored.
Just really quickly, my cousin got killed over off of Braeswood, and he got shot at 2:30, and the medical examiner's office didn't pick his body up until 12. I was on city council, and when I got there, I asked why. The HPD was there. They were laughing. Our family was there. My cousin was on the ground. People were taking camera phone pictures. I called the police as a city council member and said, hey, can you guys at least, I know you can't touch the body because you can't contaminate it, but can you at least put Van so that he could at least have some dignity in death? And can you at least get your officers not to laugh? Can you get them to act like it's serious? And what you have to say to your kids is you have to tell them, unfortunately, in a perfect world, we would be judged by the content of our character, not the color of our skin. Unfortunately, we don't live in that world just yet. And so when you get stopped, here's what you need to know.
Thank you, guys. Derek Muhammad, attorney Jolanda Jones,
you.
for sharing your knowledge with us. Melinda, you're the anchor. Wrap it up. for
Oh,
me.
well, I had a final question for you as we wrap it up. What do you have for us tonight? What's next in this story? I know you're going to get a lot of feedback.
Well, I received some calls as soon as the story aired, and they told me don't pick them up.
Okay.
You know what that means?
Yes, yes.
Hateful calls.
Yes, I think I
never
understand
pick those
exactly
up
what that
anyway.
means. We need to talk about that at another time, the position
Yes.
that you're in when
Yeah.
you bring these stories and these videos to the public light. It affects you as well.
Yeah.
But it's uncensored.
But as you get older, then you learn and you live, and what other people say don't have as big of an impact as it did once when you were 20 or when you were 30.
Good
so I
for
move
you.
on.
Good for you.
You've grown a thick skin, Isiah.
Yes.
Right. They
Since
say
you're an older man now,
Exactly.
you can handle it. Okay, well, thank you so much for joining us for this conversation after the newscast, and it'll continue on social media, our Facebook pages and Twitter, and just don't call Isiah if you can help it. We'll see
Exactly.
you at 9.